The Earth had known peace for over a century. The scars of the Great War, the brutal conflict between humans and the alien forces that once sought to enslave them, had slowly faded into history. Earth had rebuilt, risen, and thrived, becoming the centerpiece of a united galactic federation. The once disparate nations now stood as one under the banner of the Terran Coalition, with humanity at the forefront of technological and military innovation. The Vanguard, Earth's elite defense force, was a symbol of this newfound strength. General Marcus Cross stood on the observation deck of the Vanguard headquarters, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond the glass. His dark eyes, though weathered by years of war, still held the fire of a soldier who had seen too much to be easily fooled by appearances. A light breeze stirred the air, carrying the hum of the bustling base below. Yet Cross's mind was far from the peaceful atmosphere. He'd been receiving reports all week, fragments of strange signals, coded messages intercepted by Earth's most advanced listening posts. Initially, the intelligence agencies dismissed it as a routine anomaly or an issue with the satellites. But Cross knew better. The Vanguard's intelligence division had been on high alert, scrutinizing every piece of data. Something was wrong, something bigger than a mere glitch. "General, you need to see this," came a voice behind him. Cross turned to see Captain Lena Ramirez, his second in command, holding a tablet. Her face was tight with concern. The screen flickered, displaying an encrypted transmission that had just been decoded. At first glance, it appeared to be a jumble of alien symbols, incomprehensible to anyone who wasn't familiar with the languages of the galaxy's more obscure civilizations. But Ramirez had already begun translating, her fingers flying across the screen. It's a warning, General," she said. "A call to arms. A threat from a race we thought was extinct, the Eurokan." Cross's jaw tightened. The Eurokan. They had been the nightmare of humanity's early spacefaring years, a brutal, expansionist species that nearly wiped out entire colonies in their quest for domination. The war against them had cost millions of lives, and though humanity had finally pushed them back, there were rumors that some remnants of their forces had survived, hiding in the dark corners of the galaxy. "Are we sure about this?" Cross asked, his voice low, almost measured. "The Eurokan have been silent for decades. We destroyed their empire. What could they possibly want now?" "That's just it," Ramirez replied, scrolling through the transmission. "They're not just threatening Earth, General. This message is directed at all human colonies everywhere. The Eurokan are preparing to strike again. But this time, they'd found something. A weapon. Something we've never encountered before." Cross's mind raced as he absorbed the magnitude of the situation. The Eurokan's previous weaponry had been horrifying. Planet-destroying bombs, energy weapons that could reduce entire cities to rubble in minutes. But this, something new, something even worse. He turned toward the large holographic map of the galaxy, his fingers brushing across the touch panel, zooming in on the distant regions where the Eurokan had once been strongest. "How soon can we mobilize?" he asked, his tone now resolute. "Immediately, sir," Ramirez replied. "But we need the approval of the Council. They're going to want evidence before they act." Cross paused, his fingers hovering above the map. The Council would drag their feet, as always. Bureaucracy, politics, it was all the same. They wouldn't act quickly enough, and in the time it took for them to deliberate, Earth and its colonies could be under attack. "We don't have time for the Council," Cross muttered. "Prepare the Vanguard. We're going to need every ship, every soldier. If the Eurokan are coming, we meet them head-on, before they even know we're ready." Ramirez's eyes gleamed with determination. "Yes, sir. But this will be different, General. We may be facing a threat like no other." Cross stared at the map again, his mind already calculating their first move. The Vanguard had faced impossible odds before, but this time he had a sinking feeling that humanity's survival wasn't guaranteed. And as the hum of the Vanguard's engines filled the air around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this war would be unlike any they'd fought before. The Eurokan were coming. and the Vanguard was all that stood between them and the extinction of humankind. The news spread across Earth in waves, each more ominous than the last. For years, the Eurokan had been little more than a faded memory, an ancient terror relegated to history books and war archives. Yet now, their return seemed inevitable. The encrypted message sent by the Vanguard's intelligence division had confirmed it. The Eurokan Empire was rising again. By the time General Cross called the first emergency meeting of the Terran Coalition's highest leaders, the Council had already begun to prepare for what they called containment protocols. Essentially, a delay tactic to buy time, arguing that they needed concrete evidence before engaging in any military action. Cross sat at the head of the table, his jaw clenched, barely containing his frustration. He had expected the bureaucracy, but in his heart, he knew they were too slow. "We've received no confirmation of an imminent threat," Chancellor Ellison, the leader of the Terran Coalition, said with his usual air of cautious diplomacy. "It's possible this is just an isolated incident. We need more intel before we act." Cross's eyes narrowed. "You want more intel? You've got it." He gestured toward a massive screen at the front of the room. On it was a live feed from Vanguard reconnaissance satellites positioned at the edge of the solar system. The image was grainy, but clear enough to send a chill through the room. The unmistakable silhouette of a massive warship, unlike anything Earth had ever encountered, hovered just beyond the planet's outer defense grid. The Eurokan fleet had arrived, and they had brought their full might with them. "Gentlemen," Cross said, his voice cold, "this is not a drill. This is the beginning of an invasion." The council went silent, the room suddenly tense as Cross's words settled in. Chancellor Ellison looked over at the rest of the members, a flicker of doubt crossing his features before he steeled himself. "We can't rush into action," Ellison replied, voice strained. "The defense network will hold. We've been monitoring the Eurokan for months." Cross slammed his fist onto the table, making everyone jump. "You've been monitoring them. You think we can simply wait for them to make their move. That's what they want. The Eurokan are not coming here to negotiate. They're coming to kill us, and by the time we're ready, it'll be too late." The tension in the room was palpable, but Cross's words had struck a nerve. He could see the unease creeping into the faces of the council members. They knew, deep down, that humanity had underestimated their enemies before. The Eurokan were ruthless, relentless, and they never gave warning. General Cross, with all due respect, a military advisor, spoke up, his voice low and uncertain. "We need to assess the size of the fleet. If they're truly prepared for war, we'll need a coordinated defense, but our resources are stretched thin." Cross's eyes flashed with barely contained fury. "We don't have the luxury of time, and we don't have the numbers to play by their rules. The Vanguard will take the fight to them." He stood up, his imposing figure casting a shadow over the room. "This isn't just about Earth. This is about the survival of humanity itself. We fight or we die." Now, as Cross made his way to the exit, the council members exchanged uneasy glances, but none spoke out. They all understood, at least on some level, that Cross was right. This wasn't a threat they could ignore. But as the general left the room, there was no illusion about the gravity of the situation. Humanity's greatest warriors, the Vanguard, had been called to the front lines once more. The next few days were a blur. Cross assembled his team, ordering a full mobilization of every Vanguard unit. Earth's outer defense grid, now considered one of the most formidable in the galaxy, was already on high alert, but it was clear that it wouldn't be enough. Cross knew the Eurokan were just the tip of the iceberg. Whatever weapon they had found, it had to be the key to their sudden resurgence. As the Vanguard's fleet prepared to launch, Cross found himself on the bridge of the flagship Proteus, staring out into the cold expanse of space. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of the galaxy bearing down on him. "General," Ramirez's voice broke through the silence. She stood next to him, eyes filled with concern. "We've intercepted a transmission." They're calling it the Catalyst. Whatever it is, it's the Eurocan's new weapon. If we don't stop it, Earth won't just fall. It'll be wiped from the map. Cross clenched his fists. The name sounded ominous, but he couldn't afford to be distracted. There was only one goal now: find the Eurocan fleet and destroy it before the Catalyst could be deployed. The Vanguard's fleet was ready. They would fight, and they would show the Eurocan exactly why humanity was not to be underestimated. The Vanguard's fleet, a formidable armada of Earth's finest ships, gathered in the cold void of space, positioned just beyond Earth's atmosphere. Their engines hummed with energy, the ships ready for war. The largest of them all, the flagship Proteus, stood in the center, its sleek design and advanced weaponry a testament to humanity's ingenuity. General Cross stood at the helm, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed at the stars. "General," Captain Ramirez's voice cut through the tension in the bridge. "We've received word from the fleet. The Eurocan are holding position at the edge of the system, just beyond the asteroid belt. Their numbers are vast, far more than we anticipated. They've spread out, creating a blockade around Earth." Cross didn't respond immediately. The Eurocan had clearly come prepared, and their forces were vast. There were enough warships to surround the entire planet, each one a battle-ready behemoth with weapons designed to tear through Earth's defenses. His mind raced. They couldn't face this kind of enemy head-on without an advantage, without something they could use to break the Eurocan's stranglehold. "Sir," Ramirez continued, "there's another piece of intel we've uncovered. The Catalyst, the weapon we've been hearing about. We've traced its signal to a distant star system in the outer rim. The Eurocan are transporting it. Whatever it is, they're right now. If we don't stop them, it will be deployed, and we'll lose everything." Cross turned, his face hardening with resolve. "We don't have the manpower to fight the fleet and stop the Catalyst. But if we can hit the Eurocan where it hurts, where they least expect it, we might have a shot." He paused, eyes narrowing. The Catalyst was the key. But where was it? What was it? And why hadn't they detected it earlier? "We need to find the Catalyst," Captain Cross said, his voice steely. "We don't have the luxury of time. The Eurocan are ruthless. If they found something powerful enough to threaten Earth, they'll use it as soon as they can." Ramirez nodded. "The mission is clear. But how do we get to the Catalyst? If it's in a remote star system, the Eurocan will be guarding it heavily. It's a suicide mission." "Exactly," Cross replied. "Which is why we're going to need a small team to get in and out, quickly, silently, and without anyone knowing we're there. I'll lead the mission personally." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "General, with all due respect, you're the leader of the Vanguard. We can't afford to lose you on a covert operation." Cross's expression softened, just for a moment. "That's exactly why I need to go. The Vanguard needs a symbol, and if we can strike fast and hard, it'll show the Eurocan that humanity won't back down, no matter the odds." The decision was made. The team would consist of only the most experienced, those who could operate in the shadows, those who had faced impossible odds before and lived to tell the tale. Ramirez, the brilliant strategist, would stay behind to coordinate the larger fleet. Alongside her, the team would include Sergeant Ulrich Thorne, a former Special Forces operative with an uncanny ability to infiltrate enemy lines. Dr. Celine Jung, a brilliant scientist and weapons expert who would be tasked with analyzing and dismantling whatever the Catalyst turned out to be, and Captain Callan Rios, an expert pilot with nerves of steel. The small team would leave the Proteus in a stealth ship, bypassing Eurocan patrols and heading straight for the outer rim. The journey would be perilous, as they would be crossing through a labyrinth of asteroid fields and enemy vessels. They had no time to lose. As the mission's preparations took place, Cross found a moment of solitude in his quarters. He sat at his desk, staring at an old photo, one of his family, long gone. The weight of the decision he'd just made pressed heavily on him. This mission wasn't just about the survival of Earth. It was about something more, a promise to the generations who had come before, and to those who would come after. Humanity's future depended on their ability to face the darkness without flinching. With a deep breath, Cross stood and walked toward the briefing room. The Vanguard was ready. As the team gathered, Cross gave each of them a brief nod. There was no need for words. They understood the stakes. The time for strategy and diplomacy was over. Earth's future depended on their ability to strike at the heart of the Urokans' new weapon before it was too late. The Vanguard would become humanity's last hope, and they would fight with every ounce of strength they had. The stealth ship's engines roared to life, and the team plunged into the darkness of space, racing toward their unknown fate. They knew one thing for certain: failure was not an option. If they didn't succeed, the Urokan would take Earth, and humanity would be wiped from the stars. The stealth ship Vanguard 7 cut through the cold void of space, its hull designed to blend seamlessly with the darkness, its engines humming softly to avoid detection. Inside, the small team sat in tense silence, the weight of their mission pressing heavily on each of them. General Marcus Cross stood at the front of the cockpit, his eyes fixed on the holographic star chart before him, tracing the route to the distant star system where the catalyst was believed to be hidden. The atmosphere was thick with the uncertainty of what lay ahead, but there was something else, something more insidious. The feeling that everything was going too smoothly, that they had underestimated the complexity of this mission. Approaching the asteroid belt, Captain Callan Rios's voice broke the silence, his hands flying over the controls with practiced ease. The holographic display blinked, showing a dense field of jagged rock, their trajectories constantly shifting in unpredictable patterns. Cross didn't respond immediately. His mind was elsewhere, running over the details of the plan, trying to sense anything out of place. His instincts had never failed him, and right now, something didn't sit right. He glanced over his shoulder at Sergeant Elaric Thorne, who was hunched over a terminal, analyzing the data coming from the ship's sensors. "Anything?" Cross asked. Thorne didn't look up. "No sign of Urokan patrols so far, General. But it's too quiet. We should expect a heavy presence as we get closer to the rim." Dr. Celine Jung, sitting at a workbench behind Thorne, was carefully examining a small device, a part of the ship's cloaking system. Her sharp eyes darted between the schematics on her tablet and the actual components in front of her. "Stealth systems are operating at full efficiency," she said without looking up. "But if we're too careless, the Urokan might detect us. This ship is state-of-the-art, but it's still vulnerable." Cross nodded. "Keep us under the radar. We can't afford any surprises." As the ship plunged deeper into the asteroid field, the tension grew, each member of the team acutely aware of the risks. For now they had to rely on the one thing that had always kept them one step ahead: their ability to remain unseen. Hours passed, and the ship edged closer to their destination. But as they neared the outskirts of the target system, something finally caught Cross's attention. A slight blip on the radar, too subtle to be a typical scan. "Rios," Cross called, his voice sharp. "Hold position. Something's off." Rios's fingers hesitated over the controls, his gaze flickering between the asteroid belt and the redouts. "What do you mean, General?" "I don't know yet," Cross muttered. His instincts told him that they weren't alone anymore. The ship's sensors buzzed, and Thorne's voice cut through the silence again. "We've been compromised." Before Cross could respond, the lights flickered, casting shadows across the walls. The entire ship shuddered, the telltale vibrations of a sudden jolt echoing through the hull. "What the hell was that?" Rios barked, his hands gripping the controls. "I'm reading multiple signatures," Thorne shouted. "We're surrounded. The Urokan are on us." "No," Cross snapped. His mind raced as he realized what had happened. They had been betrayed. Someone on their team had given away their position. They hadn't just been followed. They had been led directly into a trap. "Seal the hatch," Cross ordered. "Get us out of here." But it was too late. The first explosion rocked the ship, sending it spiraling into the asteroid field, the force of the blast tearing through the hull. Alarms blared as the ship's systems went into lockdown, but the crew was thrown into chaos. In the midst of the confusion, Cross saw something that made his heart stop. Standing in the doorway, a figure emerged from the shadows, one he never thought would betray them. "Sergeant Thorne." "Thorne," Cross shouted, his voice a mixture of anger and disbelief. "What the hell are you doing?" The soldier's face, once a symbol of loyalty and discipline, was now cold and detached. He slowly lowered his weapon, aiming it directly at Cross. His eyes, once filled with camaraderie, now held only contempt. "You should have known," General Thorne said, his voice eerily calm. "We were never going to stop them. The Eurocan are going to win this war, and we're always going to be the first obstacle." Cross's mind spun as the betrayal sank in. The mission, their hope for humanity, had been sabotaged from the inside. Thorne had been working for the Eurocan all along, feeding them information about the Vanguard's movements, setting them up for this very moment. "Why?" Cross demanded, his voice cracking. "You were one of us. You swore to fight for Earth." Thorne's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Earth is weak. The Eurocan are inevitable. You're all just delaying the inevitable. I've already secured a deal with them. The catalyst is theirs. And soon, so will your precious planet." The last thing Cross saw before the room went dark was Thorne's weapon rising, and then nothing but the crushing weight of betrayal as the ship spiraled toward an unknown fate. General Marcus Cross awoke to the harsh hiss of air as the emergency systems engage. His head throbbed, and his vision blurred, but he could make out the flickering red lights that bathed the wreckage around him. The ship had taken heavy damage, the controls unresponsive, and the hum of the engines had given way to an unsettling silence. His chest burned where the blast had thrown him against the bulkhead, but there was no time to linger on pain. He forced himself to sit up, his body protesting, and surveyed the damage. The Vanguard 7 was in pieces. Sections of the hull had been torn away, exposing the innards of the ship, wires sparking intermittently. The comms were down, and the emergency lights cast long shadows over the lifeless crew quarters. He could hear the distant groaning of the ship's frame, struggling to hold together under the strain. "Report," Cross grunted, pushing himself up to his feet and clutching the nearest support beam for stability. Nothing. The ship was eerily still. His mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. Thorne's betrayal had sent them crashing into the asteroid field, but where was everyone else? Had they survived? Were they still alive? Cross staggered down the dark corridor toward the bridge, every step a test of his strength. The ship's internal communication system was down, and he couldn't risk waiting to find out what had happened to the rest of the crew. Thorne was working with the Eurocan, but what did that mean for the rest of the mission? What did it mean for Earth? As he reached the door to the bridge, he paused, taking a deep breath. The crew had to be alive. Ramirez, Jung, Rios. They were all highly trained, capable individuals. If anyone could survive a crash like this, it was them. He pushed open the door, and the sight that met him was worse than he could have imagined. Captain Ramirez was slumped against the console, her face pale, but her breathing steady. Dr. Jiang was sprawled on the floor near the navigation table, groaning but conscious. Rios, ever the fighter, was already at the helm, working furiously to restore control to the ship. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but there was a look of determination in his eyes, one that spoke of desperation. "Cross," Ramirez gasped, lifting her head with some difficulty. "Thank God you're alive." Cross rushed over to her, kneeling beside her. "What happened? How bad is it?" "We're in trouble," she said, her voice strained. "Thorne sabotaged the ship. He worked with the Eurocan from the start. He gave them our position, led us right into their trap. The catalyst is already on its way to deployment. If we don't stop it, Earth is finished." Cross's stomach tightened. "We're not dead yet. What's the status on the ship? Can we still fly? We're still functional, Rios said, not looking away from the controls. Barely. The engines are still online, but it's a mess. We'll be sitting ducks out here if we don't get out of the asteroid field. Do what you can, Kalen, Cross ordered, standing up. We need to get to the catalyst. Now. Rios didn't hesitate, his hands flying over the controls. The ship lurched forward, groaning as the engine sputtered back to life. The ship shuddered as it broke free from the debris field and began its slow journey toward the distant star system. Meanwhile, Dr. Zhang, still kneeling on the floor, was working on a terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I've been trying to trace the catalyst's location. It's moving faster than we expected. We're not going to make it if we don't speed up the search. Can you pinpoint the exact location? Cross asked, his voice low but urgent. We need to hit them first, before they deploy it. I'm getting close, Zhang replied, her eyes narrowing. There's a relay station in the next system, one that connects to their central command. If we access it, we can track the catalyst's exact position, but it's going to be heavily guarded. Cross clenched his fists. He could already feel the pressure building, the weight of the decision, the responsibility. Failure wasn't an option. He couldn't allow Earth to fall, couldn't allow the Eurokan to complete their weapon. We'll get there, he said firmly. Prepare for extraction. Once we're close, we'll infiltrate and shut it down. Ramirez's voice was tense. We don't know what we're walking into. Thorne's already shown us how far he's willing to go. The Eurokan won't hesitate to kill us. Then we don't hesitate either, Cross replied. He turned to Rios, who was guiding the ship through the stars. Full speed ahead, Kalen. We'll make sure the catalyst never sees the light of day. Rios nodded without a word, pushing the throttle forward. The Vanguard 7 surged ahead, racing toward the unknown. Every moment, the odds stacked higher, but General Cross didn't care. His mind was set on one thing only, humanity's survival, and he would be damned if he let anyone, Eurokan or traitor, stand in his way. The Vanguard 7 tore through the stars, its battered hull groaning with every tremor as it pushed toward the distant star system. The ship's systems were barely holding together, but it was still functional, barely. Cross stood at the front of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the glowing map of their route, his mind racing with every possibility. The catalyst was close now. They had to be. General, we've just entered the system. Rios's voice cut through the tense silence. I'm picking up multiple Eurokan signatures on our long-range scans. They're waiting for us. Cross's jaw clenched. He had expected this. The Eurokan weren't just defending the catalyst. They were setting up a perimeter to make sure no one reached it. He couldn't let the fear of being outnumbered stop him. He had already seen the consequence of hesitation, the destruction of their fleet's resources, the threat to Earth itself. Get us in closer, Cross ordered. We'll need to be inside their defenses to disable their relay station. Ramirez, who had been monitoring the tactical screens, turned to face him. General, it's going to be a tight squeeze. We're not exactly equipped for a head-on fight. If we draw attention, we're finished. We're not drawing attention, Cross replied. We're going in undetected. We'll hit them where it hurts, then vanish before they know what happened. Dr. Zhang, still working feverishly at a terminal, looked up. The relay station's location is locked. If we breach their defenses, we'll be able to send a signal that'll give us access to the catalyst's coordinates. But it's not going to be easy. The station is heavily guarded, and the Eurokan will have patrols all over the place. We'll have to be quick. Then we move fast, Cross said, his voice steely. Rios, take us in. We'll slip through the perimeter unnoticed. The Vanguard 7 surged forward again, this time weaving through a dense network of Eurokan warships stationed between them and their target. The ship's cloaking system hummed faintly, working overtime to keep them hidden in the vastness of space. Cross watched the monitors closely, his mind calculating every potential threat as they neared the Eurokans' defenses. Minutes felt like hours, but as they drew closer to the relay station, something felt off. The hair on the back of Cross's neck stood up. It wasn't just the Eurokan that had them surrounded. He sensed another presence, an unseen danger, lurking just beyond the ship's sensors. His eyes flicked to Ramirez. "What's the status on their patrols?" he asked quietly. Ramirez frowned as she scanned the data. "It's too quiet. The usual patrols should be in motion by now, but there's nothing. The Eurokan are staying in position, which makes me think they're expecting something. Or someone. It doesn't matter," Cross said, pushing the unsettling feeling aside. "We press on. Whatever they're waiting for, it won't stop us." The Vanguard 7 closed in on the relay station's entry point, a massive structure floating in the heart of the Eurokans' defensive perimeter. The station appeared to be just a cog in the larger machine, but to Cross, it was the linchpin. The Eurokan had likely assumed their enemies would come with overwhelming force, not the quiet precision of a small strike team. That's where they'd be wrong. He turned to the others. "Get ready. We'll breach the station's main access point and split up. Ramirez, you're with me. Zhang, Rios, take the secondary routes. If we don't meet up within 20 minutes, assume the worst." The team nodded grimly, preparing for what they knew could be their last stand. They knew the risks. Everyone did. This was humanity's final shot, and the Vanguard was all that stood between the Eurokan and Earth's doom. The ship dropped out of hyperspace and slid toward the relay station, cloaked and silent. They passed through a cloud of debris, the remnants of previous battles, remnants of ships that hadn't been fast enough. They were seconds away. "Hold on," Rios said, his voice tight with focus. The ship shuddered, and they entered the station's atmosphere. The ship's systems began to emit low-frequency warning beeps as the enemy patrols finally detected them. A red light flashed. The cloak was failing. "We've been spotted," Ramirez shouted. "Abort the approach." Cross yelled, but it was too late. The Vanguard 7 had already been detected, and alarms blared throughout the ship as Eurokan warships converged on them. The time for subtlety was over. "Prepare for impact," Cross ordered, his voice steely, just as the first volley of Eurokan fire struck the ship's weakened shields. The ship rocked violently, and the crew was thrown off balance. "We need to launch now," Ramirez shouted. Before Cross could answer, the air around them trembled. A deep rumble filled the ship, an ominous sound that sent a shiver down his spine. Something was about to go terribly wrong. They were already in the heart of the storm, and the worst was still to come. The ship shook violently as Eurokan fire slammed into the Vanguard 7's weakened shields. The force sent alarms blaring, lights flickering, and every crew member scrambling to their stations. General Cross gripped the armrest of his seat, his knuckles white as the hull groaned under the assault. The ship's systems were failing, but they couldn't afford to stop. Shields at 30% and dropping. Rios called out, his voice laced with urgency. "If we don't find cover, we're going to lose the Vanguard 7 before we even make it to the relay station." Cross's mind raced. They were too close to fail now. The Vanguard 7 had taken a beating, but it wasn't done yet. The crew wasn't done yet. "We're not running," Cross said, his voice low but resolute. "Ramirez, Zhang, prepare for launch. Rios, get us into position. We're going to make our breach. Now." The order was clear, but every second counted. The Eurokan weren't giving them any room to breathe, swarming the Vanguard 7 with wave after wave of fire. The ship shuddered with each hit, and sparks flew from the consoles as the control system struggled to stay online. "General, there's too many of them," Ramirez shouted over the din of alarms. "We can't just take them head-on like this. We need to get to the station's surface. Now." Cross's gaze hardened. He could hear the panic in her voice, but there was no other choice. They were locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse, and they needed to strike before the Eurokan retaliated with everything they had. "Rios," Cross snapped, his tone unwavering. "Take us in, low and fast." Rios's hands moved like lightning across the controls. The ship lurched forward, dodging another volley of energy blasts that scraped across the ship's aft. The shields flickered, sputtered, and went dark. But Rios didn't slow down. He veered the ship to the left, threading through a cluster of enemy warships, and brought the Vanguard 7 in low, just above the relay station's surface. "Everyone, brace yourselves," Rios shouted. The ship's engines screamed as they burned through the atmosphere, tearing through the air as the surface of the station loomed closer. They were about to enter the most dangerous phase of the mission, an assault on the Eurocan stronghold with no guarantees of survival. "Now," Cross ordered. The rear hatch of the ship opened, and the team was launched out into the frigid vacuum of space. The pressure of the external thrusters slammed them forward, but each soldier was ready. Ramirez and Cross led the charge, while Zhang and Rios followed closely behind. The crew moved with precision, their every step calculated, every movement a carefully coordinated dance as they raced to the station's nearest access point. The station's exterior loomed before them, massive and heavily fortified. The cold metallic surface reflected the distant light of the nearby stars, but there was no warmth to be found here, only steel and shadow. They'd reached the docking point and immediately set to work. Ramirez hacked into the station's control system, her fingers flying across the keypad, while Jiang set up the explosives at strategic points. Cross's eyes scanned their surroundings. The Eurocan were no doubt aware of their presence by now, and they had precious minutes before reinforcements arrived. His pulse quickened. Failure wasn't an option. "Status?" Cross asked, his voice tight with focus. "Almost there," Ramirez said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Just a few more seconds." Suddenly, a series of loud bangs echoed across the station's hull. Cross's eyes snapped to the horizon. Eurocan warships had begun their descent toward the station, intent on stopping them at all costs. "We don't have much time," Zhang shouted. "We've got a small window before they breach the station's hull." Cross's mind worked furiously. The mission depended on getting inside the station, sabotaging the relay system, and securing the catalyst's location. If they didn't disrupt the Eurocan's communications, they'd never be able to track the weapon in time. "Ready, Ramirez." She nodded grimly. "Just one more. Done." The docking mechanism clicked open. The team rushed inside, taking cover as the sound of Eurocan footsteps reverberated down the metal hallways. Cross's hand gripped his rifle tighter, and he signaled for the team to follow him. "We've got one shot," Cross muttered under his breath. "We take the relay room. We destroy it. Then we find the catalyst." They moved quickly, navigating the dark corridors of the Eurocan station, where every corner seemed to hold a hidden danger. The tension was unbearable. Their steps echoed in the silence, louder than they should have been. Cross could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the adrenaline pumping through his veins as they approached the relay room. And then, just as they turned the corner, they ran straight into the Eurocan force they had been dreading. "Ambush," Ramirez shouted, and the team immediately opened fire. The corridor erupted in gunfire as Eurocan soldiers poured out of the shadows, their weapons blazing with deadly precision. But the Vanguard was ready. Cross led the charge, cutting through the enemy forces with cold efficiency. Every shot was calculated, every movement a testament to the years of training and experience that had brought them here. But even as they fought, the sound of reinforcements drawing closer filled the air. They had only moments before the Eurocan overwhelmed them. "This is it," Cross whispered. "We end this. Now." The air was thick with smoke, the metallic scent of ozone mixing with the acrid tang of gunfire as the battle erupted around them. The Vanguard team was locked in a furious firefight with Eurocan soldiers, their weapons blasting in all directions, but Cross's focus remained unwavering. The relay room was within their grasp. If they could just reach it, The tide could still be turned. Push forward. Cross roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. His rifle barked in his hands, each shot striking down a Eurokan soldier as they advanced, their shields failing under the relentless barrage. He could feel the heat of the explosions all around him, the ground shaking beneath his boots as the station's metal walls were pockmarked with blast marks. Behind him, Ramirez and Zhang worked with methodical precision, covering their flanks while planting explosives in the corners of the hall. Their goal was clear. They had to keep the Eurokan off balance long enough to breach the relay room. The Eurokan responded in kind, reinforcements flooding from hidden doors as the enemy commander, a towering figure clad in black armor, appeared at the end of the corridor. His glowing red eyes locked onto Cross with a cold fury. The commander raised his weapon, signaling for the troops to fall back. "General," Ramirez shouted as the Eurokan began retreating. "They're pulling back, but they got reinforcements on the way. We don't have much time." Cross's mind worked in overdrive. They were so close, just a few more meters to the relay room. But with reinforcements pouring in, they had no choice but to move fast. They needed to reach the room and destroy the communication relay before the Eurokan could regroup and bring in more forces. If the relay stayed intact, they wouldn't be able to trace the catalyst's location in time. "We push through. Now," Cross commanded, and the team advanced once more, weapons raised, eyes scanning every shadow. They reached the door to the relay room. But just as Ramirez was about to enter the access code, the Eurokan commander's voice echoed down the hallway, cold and calculating. "You will not succeed, human. You are too late. The catalyst will destroy your world, and nothing you do can stop it. Your kind will be extinguished." The word sent a shiver through Cross's spine, but he refused to let fear take root. The Eurokan may have been many things, but they underestimated one thing: humanity's will to survive. With a sharp motion, Ramirez slammed her palm against the door control, and the metal door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the relay room buzzed with life. Rows of terminals lined with blinking lights and wires extending to every corner of the station. "Get to work," Zhang, Cross ordered, his eyes scanning the room. The Eurokan commander's warning still echoed in his ears, but he pushed it aside. Now was the time for action. Zhang moved quickly, setting to work on the console, her fingers flying over the keys. "I've got it," she said breathlessly. "I can disable the relay, but it'll take a few minutes. I need to rewire the main conduit." Cross's gaze hardened as he scanned the room. Time was running out, and the Eurokan weren't going to just let them waltz out. The sound of clanging boots on metal echoed in the hallway as reinforcements neared. "We're running out of time," Ramirez warned, her voice low. "We need to hold them off." Cross. The door behind them slammed open, and Eurokan soldiers poured in. Cross and Ramirez immediately took up defensive positions, firing on instinct. The station's flickering lights cast long shadows across the room as the enemy closed in. The battle for the relay room had begun in earnest. Cross's mind sharpened. The Eurokan were relentless, but so were they. Each of his team members fought with everything they had, every shot fired, every inch gained, pushing forward despite the overwhelming odds. "Zhang," Cross shouted over the gunfire. "How much longer?" "Almost there," Zhang replied, her voice strained with the effort. "I've bypassed their security protocols. The relay's going down in." Before she could finish, a burst of fire from a Eurokan soldier struck the console beside her, sending sparks flying. She ducked instinctively, but the damage was done. "Cover her," Cross roared. Ramirez moved swiftly, firing on the incoming enemy, while Cross darted toward Zhang. "We're not giving up," he said, his voice like iron. "You finish this. We'll hold them off." Zhang nodded, her hands never leaving the console as she typed furiously. With every second, Cross could feel the pressure mounting. The Eurokan were everywhere now, flooding the room like a tidal wave. But they would not break them. Not today. The minutes stretched on like hours, the gunfire deafening, the cries of battle echoing in every corner of the station. But then, just as the Eurokan commander and his forces closed in for the final push, the room's lights blinked out, and a deep, resonating hum filled the air. "I've done it," Jiang said, her voice breaking the tension. "The relay's destroyed. We've got the coordinates." A sudden, deafening explosion rocked the room, the force sending Cross and Ramirez crashing into the wall. The station was beginning to tear itself apart, and the Eurokan were retreating. But Cross didn't care. "We have what we came for," Cross said, pulling himself to his feet. "Now we finish this." The crew moved quickly, gathering their wounded, and the Vanguard 7 was already on its way back. The battle for Earth wasn't over, but they had just won the first round. The fight for humanity's survival had only just begun.